welcome to the G2E MEGAPOD. Coming to you live from the gaming floor here at the 2019 G2E. Every single week I have the brightest minds in all the gaming industry, and now I have them all sitting in the same room. Derrick Ramsey, Dustin, Gouker, Adam Candee. Guys, we'll start with you, Adam. You've walked in, you've been here for a little while, walked the gaming floor. What do you think of things so far?
I think it's robust here at G2E, but I'm going to be honest, I know these two have spent a lot more time on the floor than I have over the last couple days, so I'm going to let these other yahoos tell us a little bit more about what's going on.
I went to you first because obviously you had the least amount to add here, so I was going to let these guys come in and,
well, it's nothing new that I have the least amount to add. It just happens to be here this week. Before you go on to them, why did you get this very nice big microphone setup and the rest of us are kind of working off whatever else the kids had in the closet?
This is my personal setup from home that I brought here.
You brought your own.
Yes,
that's how seriously you take this podcast.
And I don't want, I've got the little spit protector here that I don't want someone else spitting on. This is my spit, and all the spit that goes into this microphone is mine. So,
well, spit happens, so you got to be careful with those things.
All right, Derrick, you have taken in some of the stuff here since we've been here the last couple of days. What has stuck out to you?
It's really big. We've been to a few conferences over the last year since we were here at G2E, and I'd forgotten how large this is. It is almost overwhelming to walk into this room. You could walk around for a few hours and not even see half of what there is in this room. So yeah, the scale. I just reminded of the scale of this place.
And we were talking right before this that sports betting is still a big piece of what's going on here, more than it was so before last year. But it's a little more muted than last year when everybody's like, okay, sports betting just happened a few months ago, starting to be legalized. Now it's just a little ramped down. Doesn't mean it's still not a big thing. You walk in, you're immediately see Sport Radar is the first thing you come, and when you come in the main part, SB Tech right there, another platform provider that's big into sports betting. DraftKings sponsors the media room. As I said, what a time to be alive that DraftKings is sponsoring the media room at a gambling conference. Never thought I'd see the day.
We are calling this the MEGAPOD because we are going to have tons of guests joining us throughout the course of the afternoon here, so we will be sure and Frankenstein that all together, all these interviews, and you'll be able to hear all the different people that we talk to here. Eric, one of the things that we were kind of walking around, at least on the gaming side of things, and I know we mainly talk sports betting, but we'll talk some gaming here as well. Seemed like there was a lot of the same stuff as last year. I didn't see any, we were blown away last year at the, the digital craps table and all the crazy, new slot machines, and it seemed like there was a lot of the same stuff that was out there.
Yeah, maybe we were just a little overhyped last year and a little excited to be here, but I got the same impression too. A lot of the same stuff I've seen last year, some things I saw last year that aren't even around anymore. I noticed that as well.
You're not excited for the Jeopardy slot?
We did have Jeopardy James was here yesterday, taking on apparently all comers, Adam. I'm ashamed that you weren't. I feel bad that you weren't here to go up there and take on Jeopardy James. Apparently he faced off against 60 different people or something like that.
As a two-time game show winner, I don't know that I need to prove my credentials any more than I already have, and so I wouldn't want to embarrass him. Let him have his spotlight. I have mine. Maybe someday the paths shall cross.
Price is Right is a skill game.
Price is Right. No, it's a game of chance, or is it a game of skill? I'm not sure. We should go over to the DraftKings media room and find out.
Totally off topic, but there's an awesome documentary on the Price is Right. A guy who memorized all the prices on Netflix right now. The Perfect Bid. Highly recommended.
Oh. Saw it, and yes, it is absolutely amazing. This guy's story of how often he went to try to get on stage, and then finally gets on stage, and then finds out the exact times that you're allowed to repeat as a customer or repeat as a guest and everything. Yeah, it really was. It was amazing.
Price is Right is a game of skill, just like DFS.
It actually is. It really was. For him, it was a game of skill, yes. For sure. I mean, he was helping out people from the audience. Boy, we're really getting off topic here, but it's a fascinating documentary.
Let's go farther down the rabbit hole here. Michael Larson, the guy who was on Press Your Luck, who memorized how the board actually flashed, the pattern of the board on Press Your Luck, and won significant six-figure money on Press Your Luck back in the 80s by memorizing how to get around the whammies.
Also a great maybe YouTube. I don't know where that one is, but
definitely on YouTube.
That's a good documentary too.
Gameshowreport.com.
All right, we're gonna have to pause and really. We're gonna have to buy that URL now. We really are. It's sorry. Hey, Colton, while you're over there, if you don't mind, producer Colton, if you could secure that URL for us. If you could do that, that'd be great. Dustin, one of the things we were talking about before we started recording here is you said one of the things there was something on the floor that really, really stood out to you saw yesterday.
Yeah, IMG Arena, which is working with both media partners and sports books to provide content and live feeds. They recently did a deal with UFC. The more interesting thing to me is their in-play golf betting product, which looks really cool, really robust. You have 3D visualizations of what shots look like, piggybacking a little bit off of ShotLink technology, but this is going to be stuff that you can go in sports books. You're going to be able to open up, see visualizations of what golfers are doing, very low latency. I saw them. They had you hit a golf ball into a screen there, and it shows the ball flight tracking. The amount of latency. It's like immediate, and you're going to be able to bet with this a lot. It goes live in Q1 with a couple of sports books, at least in Europe. It sounds like they haven't announced who those are, but I'm really excited to see this. And as we always talk about when we're watching golf, we would be firing off golf bets all the time if there was a cool in-play product.
All of us are golf fans. All of us watch, and Adam, you and I, we've talked about this on other programming we've done, and not to beat a dead horse here, but I really and truly believe that of all of the sports that are out there right now, the one that has the most to gain as far as helping the sport grow and as far as popularity goes, I think it's golf. Because when you look, one of the things that people complain about, it's too slow. Well, actually, the slowness of golf works in its favor when it comes to in-play sports betting. And if we can get a product that, like Dustin's saying, one that very low latency, that every single shot matters and every single shot counts. And if you want to just sit there and follow your favorite golfer around the golf course and bet on every one of his shots, this is big.
The future of whether it's golf betting or sports viewership in particular is incremental viewing, right? The whole idea is you're not going to get someone to watch a game for 3 hours, watch a golf tournament on TV for 5 hours. You just want to get them interested long enough to spend 20, 30 minutes, and that's where you're going to get your in-play betting. So golf works perfectly for that. Baseball also works perfectly, I think, for that with the speed that it has. And once people, and you and I have talked about this, once people get up to snuff with basketball especially, you find that that's also a great in-game product. So for golf in particular, there's a lot to grow from to give people a reason to watch other than to try to say, hey, who's going to win the tournament today?
And we also poke fun at quote-unquote official data a lot on this podcast and our content, but this is like a place where it's this is real official data that matters, and if you you can't just make up where these guys are putting a lot of effort into figuring out where the shots are, creating a product that is works for bettors, works for the league. That's official data that I can get behind and that matters, and it's gonna be valuable to sportsbook operators.
Eric, you're a big golf fan. You and I talk online every single time there's a golf tournament. We're sweating all the things that are going on here. We've seen, just from a DFS standpoint, we saw how massive DFS golf got really almost seemingly overnight. This went from something as soon when they launched it, people going, I wonder if people are going to really get into this, to them having $1 million tournaments, to then them having millionaire maker tournaments for DFS golf. And again, I think it's just people want to be able to have a little bit more skin in the game for something they're going to be watching anyway.
Yeah, like you said, and it is just perfectly suited to speculating on from both a fantasy perspective and for betting. I think this is the innovation that we hope to see here in this building, is those kinds of things like that. I don't know the source of the survey. I think it might have been AGA recently that had a large percentage of Americans thinking that the sports betting tech is ahead of casino tech right now. That is not the case. If we can see walking around the floor, the gaming tech is very modern and elite. We hope sports betting will get there. Things like this from IMG are things that are moving sports betting in that direction.
This is the wild thing from that survey you're talking about, is that Americans generally think sports betting technology is ahead of the curve, and we're Europeans sit there, come over here and LOL, what do you guys are so far behind. And we're we were here in Nevada, where the tech is obviously not that great, and it's better in New Jersey, but we're still but that's what average Joe's I can bet on my phone. This is way cool.
Yeah.
Maybe sometimes we oversell product a little bit. Maybe not, but you're still gonna again, these good in-play products, that's going to keep you coming back. You don't get the little spinny circle when you're trying to place a bet. That's all good stuff. But yeah, Americans, it was really eye-opening to me that Americans think sports betting tech is good.
Well, what you talked about, Dustin, with that IMG product, look at what IMG does overseas. If you look at the streaming rights and the things that they are putting out in the European market, you can understand what the future really could look like, whether it's UFC, golf, or if they're able to acquire more rights here in America as it moves forward, because their ability to integrate, which is really where the future is in all this, is being able to integrate the streaming rights with the sports betting technology. They're ahead of the curve there when it comes to Europe.
Yeah, and I talked to them too about that. I mean, even they admit we're rights are hard to get, like major golf events or major, like, even though they're really plugged in, have partnerships with UFC, you're not going to see, major UFC bouts or majors streaming through apps, but little by little I think they hope to get there, and that's how it's going to happen.
And I'm glad you guys brought up the UFC partnership. That was one of the things that was announced, shortly before shortly before G2E went live, and there was, Dana White was over there. They were doing this big song and dance, and basically I played around with it just a little bit whenever I walked by over there, and so I mean, look, it's probably a little insider pool for a lot of people. I mean, you're talking about betting on submission attempts in a fight or significant strikes or, things like that, how many takedown attempts and whatnot. But look, we've always talked about the one thing we will never, ever, ever talk down about is people trying to innovate and people trying new things and trying to, bring new products to market here. So while I don't know exactly how well this is going to catch on with just the casual fan and whatnot, I do at least applaud them for going in this direction.
Matt, you and I had a bit of this conversation last night. I think that there's something to be said about modeling it after some of the New Jersey tech, right? Where the New Jersey tech gives you the who will win, right? As opposed to saying money line, right? You can do the same sort of thing with who's going to win the fight and then offer these other markets for the more serious bettor who is someone who's more of a big fan who wants to go deep down into it.
One of the interesting things I thought as a kind of a byproduct of this as well is, a lot of these fighters go into the third round of a fight or the fifth round of a fight not really knowing whether they're winning or not. And you could have someone kind of monitoring the app and seeing what the live odds look like and letting the corners know, hey, by the way, your guy's down at least according to this. Like, he needs to win this round to win the fight. Kind of a way that this could even change the way fighters go about fighting and stuff like that, which is one of the things I thought about at first when I first saw this was, wow, these guys might get a little insight as to whether they need a finish or something.
Yeah, if you're not following those betting markets as a fighter, you're probably doing it wrong. Yeah, you can't. Your corners should be. Yeah. That's a great idea. Free ideas for people in the UFC industry, which I know you should market that.
Yeah, hashtag free ideas. Just give us credit here on the Legal Sports Report podcast.
So the two things we've innovated today are putting the UFC app from IMG Arena into the corners and GameShowReport.com. Is that the service we're providing to the industry today?
Yeah, it is. And GameShowReport.com will go live in Q1 as well of 2020.
Hey, whoa.
You tell people you tell people stuff like that. You get them all excited. If we go to Q2, it's fine. If we have to push it out a little bit, it's perfectly fine. We'll talk about that. But guys, we are going to have a ton of guests join us here over the course of the afternoon. So stick around on the pod and enjoy all of this stuff that we have going on here. We'll continue to add some commentary along the way, and if we see anything interesting on the gaming floor, we'll bring it to you as well.
Here at the G2E special podcast
Mega
room.
Podcast
in the very, very special glass cage of emotion where we're hosting this thing today. We are happy to welcome in Max Meltzer from Kambi Sports. What's going on, man? How's your convention been so far?
It's been great. Thanks for inviting me into the Crystal Maze. I appreciate this.
Yes.
It's been a fantastic show for us. I mean, in particular yesterday, we were quite amazed at the obviously the prospecting we're doing, but the kind of footfall we were getting. I think the major thing that's happened now is there was a lot of people right at the beginning when PASPA was appealed, lots of competitors going, hey, this is what we can do, we're fantastic at sports betting, but now actually people are going, Kambi are the ones that have actually delivered in the most states, and they're actually showing that they've got that capability. So I think reputation is now starting to take over beyond just sales perspective. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, I'm very curious about how that has played out in year 1+ here post-PASPA, because there was definitely a gold rush feel to what was going on here and trying to capture that footfall last year, right? And just get people in the door and try to sell them on what is available. How do you think you guys have been able to differentiate in that way?
Well, you're very right. I think people very early on were thinking, well, we have to make some big decisions and took some big risks. And some people have actually, some companies have clearly struggled with that. And there's also other companies that perhaps not being so vocal about it, but maybe their relationships, partnership decisions have not quite worked out the way that they thought they have. I think the biggest way that we differentiate ourselves is first that you can see, first of all, you know that our customers are successful. You can see that they are market leaders in the states that we have launched in. Now, obviously, all of them are different sizes and shapes of what they want to achieve, but also the fact that someone like DraftKings has built their own front end completely, or we've been able to sign a deal with, say, someone like Penn and then get them launched within a couple of months. I think people hear that, they see it, and now we differentiate by being performance-led. And just actually evidencing what we say we're going to do. That's how we've been, and I think that long may that continue.
I was going to say, last year you could, like Adam hinted this, you could have snuck up on people. I think last year. I think if you're in industry now, you know who Kambi is. Right. It would be hard to not know who you are with the breadth of partnerships and books that you have out there right now. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you're just tell me about that. Like last year, nobody. I'm not saying nobody knows who you are over here in the U.S., but here now, like people just say, "Oh, Kambi, that's the company that's crushing all the sportsbook markets."
Absolutely, but look, Kambi also has never taken an approach anywhere in the world to be like the big brand right in front of your face to try and splash it across. We've always believed in being very clean, integrity first, focusing on high quality sportsbook that reputation will eventually develop itself. We didn't do the big splash, but what you got it's just like the iceberg, of course. I mean, it's actually the amount of hard graft that has gone underneath the water, so to say, to where we've ended up now. And people have recognized good relationships. We've got a fantastic team of people, including everything from our legal and regulatory staff who have fantastic relationships with regulators, and I think that's why we're so quickly to be first in the marketplace, and through to our infrastructure capabilities, our scalability of technology, and I think that's really recognized by people. And if you're a big organization, someone who really wants to be market leaders, you can't afford to be late to market through technological reason. If you want to do it for some sort of investment reason, or you've got your own strategic positioning, that's your choice. But I think people recognize with Kambi is it's actually up to them to be able to define their future, because don't worry about the technology, that will be covered. Which you can't say around the industry, that's how it is. And we can be as bold as saying that because it's evidenced, but also we give them the ability to really stand out and be different.
Max, how has your company changed since PASPA over the last year or so in the way you guys are, allocating resources and what you guys are focused on?
You used to be in the U.S. not that long ago, right?
Yeah. Right. I mean, so I remember being here actually physically when PASPA was being repealed, and then basically we got in a car and started driving around, and I remember getting in the huge Chevys and going up to, say, Connecticut, where eventually we signed Mohegan Sun, and can't believe the amount of miles we've done. But since then, we've really scaled as an organization. We've got a Philadelphia office now that's got about 25 people in it, which includes everything from the partner managers that look after our partners through to the traders, regulatory staff, IT staff, retail technicians, and we expect to expand that quite exponentially. And Philly being a sports mad town, it's a great place to get some really top talent. And I can only see that continuing. We're going to get more Americans into the business. And look, I mean, Americans don't want to be second to anything, so having a lot of European experience coming in, but also we want to combine the best of what we're doing in Europe and around the world with American talent as well. And this is where a lot of innovation and technology will improve.
So were there any preconceptions you think that your company came in with about the American market that you've had to sort of reset as you've gone along, that lessons learned and things like that as you've developed the product here in the U.S.?
Without a doubt, you've got to learn from the data, and that was the most important thing, that we're seeing the kind of average bets, the type of experience that people actually wanted from betting. And obviously the average stake here is much larger than it is in Europe, and we noticed that actually Americans are more likely to bet on a wider breadth of sports than others. But what's been interesting for us is also some of the stuff we came here with actually has proven to be as relevant and as important as we thought it would be. I mean, we came here, I remember people saying kiosks were irrelevant, I remember saying, it's that relationship between the teller and the numbers, and I'm like, 75% of all of our bets are coming from kiosks now in PA. And
I don't want to deal with a real live person. I don't know about you guys.
But that's right. I mean, but also we have that other technology, which is even for land-based, is build it on your own app first, and then take it to a machine or a teller to actually scan it in. And actually, people do want to just be able to put their own bets on. And there is that nervous approach with some customers who are like, the numbers can be a bit overwhelming. I'd like to do this myself directly. And I think that we've proven a lot in what we're saying, and it bores people to tears. But once NFL is the games are over, what are they going to do next? You want them to be entertained. Well, it might not be something they're watching, but if there's a tennis product available and it's in play and it's live and you've got something fantastic, or we said from the beginning, it's about product. It gives that kind of experience to customers. You've got to have that, and I think that's proven to be more correct than perhaps some of the Vegas sportsbooks originally were telling us it would be in the US. So, but we've learned. We're humble. We're continuing to learn in that sense. But also we're glad that we've been able to bring our technology and see that it works very well for the American customer as well.
You hinted at the Penn National Gaming deal. I guess we need to talk about that a little bit.
Sure.
Obviously, lots of different ways of going. MGM and Caesars already had their products that they're going to go with.
That's right.
Boyd Regional Gaming Company went with FanDuel. Just use that. What did Penn National want when you guys got the deal? They obviously wanted to do their own product with you guys. So tell me a little bit about what you knew what they wanted and why they ended up going with you.
Penn National took their time, and I mean, originally I thought, well, why are they taking so long to make their decision? But actually, looking at it now, you think, well, they actually took some really good time to reflect on what's happening right now out there and this is it's a marathon, not a sprint. They recognize that they also have the land-based opportunity, actual licensing to take their time, because they're actually going to get access, whereas others were thinking, right, we have to do access deals really quickly. How do we partner up and progress? Penn National, they're great at venture building. They understand M&A. They had a fantastic team that they brought in alongside what they've currently got from a strategic perspective, and they recognized that they wanted to do something that will make them stand out as their own brand, but also they're a good technology company. So they actually did a very rigorous analysis of us against other competitors, and certainly came to see us, and quite extensively got into the depths of what we can deliver. But things like we've had APIs from the beginning that are enabling them to build their own IP and create an experience that's very different, because the great thing about a Kambi Sportsbook is we have the tools like price differentiation, which enables you to change your own pricing to be comparatively to someone else, but also build a completely different experience. So it's not like for the actual end user, they're not going to be sitting there typically thinking, okay, this is a Kambi Sportsbook and the other one's the same. You can build a completely different experience, and that's what Penn National really wanted in the end.
So I'm curious, from your perspective, we talk a lot about data and official data on the U.S. side here and how that's developed, and there's a lot of experience in the European market, in the UK market, with how that's gone on, and we tried to make some comparisons to try to say, here's how the rights have developed over time in a more mature market. What do you see going on from that end in the US, and what lessons can be learned from, like I said, from a more mature market in the UK and Europe?
It's fair to say it's okay. It's more mature. I mean, I used to work before Kambi. I used to work in the sports data field as well, particularly around horse racing for myself. So I've seen it, but I remember this is it's different, because now the leagues are starting to recognise the value that sports betting can bring from not just the data fees that they can receive, but the whole ecosystem of what sports betting can bring. And I think that I think certainly what could be learnt is the leagues, certainly, and they are trying to interact as much as possible and learn about our industry. And I think it's also down to us as an industry to try and be as supportive and educate as much as we can backwards as well, and be collaborative in the way that we hold this, and try not to be outdoing each other through different types of deals that could actually end up not really giving the cohesiveness that we're going to need as an industry. I think in Europe, certainly, creating a level playing field for data rights where everyone kind of knows where they sit is probably the best approach that Europe has taken. And I think that's kind of what we need to get to in the US, that there isn't ad hoc deals or anything going on. It's just more of a cohesive and good relationship between the leagues, between the providers and people like ourselves and the operators.
So one last question for you, and it's the broadest and gives you the most range for where you can go with this. What is the U.S. market going to look like 5 years from now?
I mean, it's a great question, actually. So where do I go with it? I mean, one thing is, all the questions that I'm asking myself at the moment is, are we going to see more mergers, large organizations like Flutter and like we've seen with, recently? Could it be that that's narrowed down for these big organizations? I'd be interested to know, particularly from the tribal casino perspective, how many of them are going to and retain their own brands rather than go across to B2Cs. But I think there's going to be splatterings of tribes that are retaining their own brand and trying to take on some of the biggest names. And I think it'd be fascinating to see. We have a future where we've got these domestic well-known brands taking on some major tribal casinos across the US, and I think that would be one of the fascinating. I think that'd be a fascinating thing in a few years to be looking at. And obviously, I expect there'd be a wide-ranging amount of states by then. But every time I try and predict a state, something else happens, and I'm sure you're the same. So it's I don't want to get into what states might happen or not, because that's.
What? Don't.
You know how
because
it is.
That's what keeps us employed. We're a legal sports report is the fact that we do try to figure out what's going on in each state as it comes.
I just make
good luck
stuff
to you
up,
guys.
Yeah. Although my line got crushed on number of states with online betting, right?
Yeah, you outpurred him quite a bit of Safi at this point,
true.
don't you?
Yeah, we're up to 7, maybe an 8 if Oregon goes live today or tomorrow. So I lose.
Well, Max, thank you so much for your time. We're going to bring up those predictions in a couple of years, and we'll be checking to see exactly how things develop based on what you said right there.
I'm glad.
Got to keep you to it.
Bring me back to the crystal maze and we'll have this discussion.
Right here. Well, thank you for joining us here in our little glass cage on the G2E floor, and enjoy the rest of the show.
Thank you very much.
All right, next up from the G2E Mega Podcast, we're happy to welcome in Scott Ferguson. I'm going to read his bio here because I don't remember it off the top of my head, so I will read it. He's a 20-year industry veteran across the Australian and European markets, and a wagering consultant who has worked with the likes of Betfair and Playtech, and he's now the gaming wagering division head of UK technology firm Captec. Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for walking about 10 yards from your booth to here to our Glass Cage podcast here. Appreciate your time.
No problem at all. It's a long trip.
Well, Dustin, you make it sound like it wasn't a challenge. We're right outside a very packed press conference right now. He had to actually navigate a whole bunch of people, so thank you. We do appreciate the effort that was made.
No problem at all. Glad to be here. In fact, what's more tricky is there was a charity fun run on Monday night. I've never run 5K in my entire life, and my thighs are absolutely burning.
That means you hurdle all those people on the way in.
You do mad things in Las Vegas. That was my one.
At least it wasn't too hot. Like a 5K in like Vegas heat would be usually pretty brutal, but that was
a lovely,
weather.
pleasant 20 degrees.
Yeah.
That was frying hot for English colleagues, but I'm Australian, so I'm used to it.
What's 20 degrees Celsius for our American listeners?
Where are we? 65.
You bring on a guest and you make him do math. Really,
60 to 65?
That's not very
comfortable.
Nice.
Yeah, something like that.
Very nice. Anyway, you messaged me, and I'm like, I always want to hear, a lot of we're all new to this here in the United States. Yep. We have a lot of people coming from Australia and Europe and everywhere else trying to tell us what to do. And you've been around. You've worked with a lot of these companies. What do you see? What's worked in the Australian markets, European markets that should be carried over to here, or what doesn't work, and what you've seen?
Well, it's fascinating how all the European firms are diving in and having big land grabs. Just basically signing deals left, right, and centre. You've got deals being signed in states which probably won't have the legislation passed for 12 months, 24 months, but the big guys are saying in, they just sign the deal. We'll worry about getting the product right, getting the technology right in time, which just take the customers so no one else can. So it's a very interesting space in that sort of regard. And there's just lots of sort of big name brands getting in. So one thing I'd hate to see is the small guys sort of sort of squeezed out of the market, which we're starting to see with like the Stars Group and Flutter sort of deal last week. It's just the big get bigger. Let's fight for the small guys. Let's see someone actually want to differentiate with the product.
Yeah, I mean, what do you do if you're a little guy right now? I mean, we have the Australian bookmaker PointsBet here, who is a kind of a little guy, I think, here, but has differentiated itself pretty well. Does well with free and earned media. It's a brand that people know and search for a little bit, at least in New Jersey. So what else do you do if you're a little guy then to differentiate yourself?
It's got to be around product and experience, because that marketing budget, golly, you're going to have very, very deep pockets if you're going to try and compete with the likes of DraftKings and the Stars Group and FoxBet and that sort of stuff. FoxBet are replicating what Skybet done from the UK with their free, what do they call it here? The Play
Super 6?
Super 6, yep. That's just been an enormous acquisition drive for them in the UK. Just dominates the market, and everyone else trying to emulate it, but without the media platform to get the distribution, then you're just going to fail. You're going to get a few hundred sort of people in rather than thousands. They had competition to start the soccer season, Premier League, where they were going to put the jackpot up to 2 million if they had 2 million customers actually sign up for it. That was the big sort of tool, instead of, I think it's 250,000 normally, but that's sort of scale of people getting in, and if you suddenly got all their details, they like football, the accumulators, chances are a large portion of that crowd is going to have a bet, and FoxBet are going to do exactly the same thing here with massive distribution. Through telly, and away they go, and anyone else trying to chase them, you're a long way behind already.
One of the things that's definitely been in the last year, we've seen a lot. Already had New Jersey Online Casino. Sports betting comes in, and I think Eric and I like to at Online Poker Report like to call it hypercharge the market. Like that cross sell is something that it's forward concept over here. But it's like as soon as sports betting went live, FanDuel, Betfair, cross sell huge. DraftKings puts some casino products in the sportsbook. Is one of the bigger casinos in New Jersey already because of that cross sell from Team Sports. And talk a little bit about that and what you've seen in other markets and how it develops.
Cross sell's enormous. Back in my Betfair days, the original founder who came up with it, a guy called Andrew Black, he was like, no, this is the exchange. We're never going to do sportsbook. We're never going to do casino or poker or any of that. And then suddenly it was like, well, the company's getting big, you get other investors in and stuff like that, and so you need to start expanding your range, you need to start making sort of margin and scale and that sort of thing. And then all these other ones came in, and then they started talking of the value of a customer who bets on 2 or 3 different products, i.e. poker and the instant games and casino, that sort of stuff, is just far, far greater, because you can absorb some losses on the sportsbook, but if they're playing casino, well, they're going to come at any time of day. Sportsbook, and so particularly with America, football's weekend. So what else are you doing for the rest of the week? You really want to push them to keep on going and stay in, but once you can get you got them in the door and you start throwing, here's some free spins, or here's some poker chips, or something else, that's enormous sort of value. And if you go in there just purely on sportsbook alone, well, your customer's going to be spending money elsewhere if they're inclined to bet on those. You've got to start adding those products so you keep a larger portion of their wallet.
Yeah, that's my favorite thing to do is say, okay, you're just legalizing sports betting. You're a dumb state. Please legalize online poker and casino too, because you're just sending them to the offshores, right? Yep. If you're here.
So I'm curious from your perspective when we talk about history sort of repeating itself across markets, and the UK in particular is at a very interesting point right now where stakes are being cut, and then a lot of revenue forecasts and expectations are being cut, along with them jobs as well. Are there any lessons in the way things have developed over the last couple of decades that you think the U.S. market needs to be cautious about as it works through its nascent stages here?
Certainly think of the consequences. Certainly when what we call them FOB-Ts, so fixed odds betting terminals, basically roulette machines and games in the betting shops. When they sort of came in, it was suddenly for bookmakers, wow, absolute money for jam, maximum of 4 in a shop, and there were bookmakers just buying independents or putting shops anywhere they possibly could, so they could get maximise those four machines. Whether they did any business on horse racing or sports. Horse racing traditionally the leader in the UK. Soccer has taken that over now, but ultimately those shops are certainly most of them now. The majority of money and profit comes from those gaming machines. So when the maximum stake on those got reduced from £100 went from 200 to 100, and then now it's down to £2. It basically got out of hand. Bookmakers forgot how to bookmake. It was during the same time that the likes of your Sport Radars and Bet Genius and IMGs came along, and all the data modelling and that sort of thing came on. So they became automated. Odds compilers hardly hardly exist anymore. You put a little bit of time into your top tier of leagues. Apart from that, it's all automated. You just have risk managers and the analysts who come in and say, nope, he's winning too much, restrict him, boot him, that sort of thing. But yeah, it's just the casino gaming sort of side in shops, and suddenly they found that a massive government restriction like that. It just got to a stage where there was too much, particularly advertising is one thing here as well. So last time I was here was 2015, obviously before PASPA, and what does see on telly? Every single ad break, DraftKings, FanDuel, da-da-da. And if that turns into... It turns into the same thing with gambling here, then eventually the tide will turn. You'll start having the public sort of turn against this is bad. There'll be too many problem gamblers, stuff like that, and then that's when the government starts to kick back. If the industry can do it responsibly and not have just a massive fight for land grab, I must take this ad space because otherwise someone else will, and then I'll lose my market share, and that's basically what happened in the UK and Australia as well. It gets to a stage where the public turns against it, and then the government have to do something. And that's where the likes of William Hill and Ladbroke, stuff like that, have been closing hundreds of shops because they've opened up all these venues which weren't economical without those gaming terminals.
Does it look like the U.S. market is headed that way to you a little bit in the early stages?
You don't seem to have much of a problem letting anything advertise on telly. Viagra, pharmaceuticals, injury,
tobacco,
ambulance chasing lawyers, all that sort of stuff. The only thing I think... my understanding is holding you back at the moment is there's so many different state laws that you can't put the gaming ads across the country. Maybe on a local sort of broadcast, but if that ever happens, then expect 8 out of 10 ads in a break to be gaming related.
Someday the critical mass will exist, and you will see ads on national broadcasts. It doesn't exist yet, but yes, someday when New York comes alive, California, you'll just see national ads.
I even noticed on watching the Sunday night, the Chargers game on Sunday night, there was subtle mentions of the spread, and that sort of thing going on NBC, which is different. Wouldn't have seen it a few years ago. The industry in the UK sort of came up with a voluntary scheme, basically getting in before the government sort of shut it right down. So now they're not proposing any live odds during matches anymore. So 5 minutes before the game through to the end, and even the replays, they're having generic sort of ads, but not this is the latest odds, first goal scorer, next second to win the second half, that sort of thing. They've taken those out as their own sort of responsible sort of code, which it'll appease the naysayers a bit. It certainly won't stop them, but at least brings it down to a manageable sort of level where it's okay, we went too far, and bring it back. You're in the home of capitalism here. I'm not sure an industry here will do that sort of thing itself. It'll have to be told to.
We'll let you go here, Scott. I'll let you do your plug here if you'd like to talk about your current venture or not. You can just be here and not plug anything. You don't have to, but I'll give you that platform.
Okay, so I'm currently heading up the gaming and wagering division for a firm named Captec. We're moving into basically the kiosk space. Brand new sort of venture. We're looking at I've got plenty of experience in kiosks, or SSBTs as we call them in the UK, self-service betting terminals. Because the fixed odds part was taken by the evil gaming machines. And worked on the software and the platform side. Now I'm on purely the hardware side. We're looking to do something a little different to the other firms who are selling the whole package, so your SBTechs and your Kambis and your Playtechs, etc. Sell the whole package. We're going to be the bit at the end with a nice shiny package, adapting for the market, adapting for the states. So you have some firms that'll there'll be different rules in, let's say, Kentucky and Mississippi and New Jersey and any other states that come along. So we're trying to build an adaptable product and work with new partners in there. And this is our first experience of this show as Captec. So.
Well, I hope you did some business here while you're here, and if not, everybody in the industry listens to the LSR podcast. I'm told.
Everybody.
It's actually it's required by most supervisors.
So finder's fee if anybody says, "Oh, I heard you on the League Sports podcast." Just kidding. Thanks for your time, Scott.
Thanks, guys.
As we mentioned, the team is strong here, Adam, and now joining us in the glass case of emotion is Jess Welman, who typically joins us to talk all things Pennsylvania, but here at G2E, everybody is doing a little bit of everything, and you stepped in listening to Gary Bettman right outside our little door right here just a little bit earlier. What did Mr. Bettman have to say about everything?
He was very forthcoming about a lot of things related to betting. As we all know, the NHL was kind of at the forefront of this stuff. Someone kind of called him in a question on the fact that the NHL used to be very against sports betting, and I believe his words were, "Is it a crime to evolve?"
I don't think it's a crime.
I'm glad you did.
Yeah, I think there's a natural question as to the veracity of your statements when you evolve in the method that they have, and I think Gary Bettman comes from a very interesting perspective because we know that deep in his history he was one of the attorneys who helped to write PASPA in the first place. So yeah, I think he's someone who comes from a very educated perspective as to the history of all of this as well, and so I think that makes him a good person to talk about the evolution of it all. Did they delve much into the history of all of this beyond the NHL's position, Jess?
No, they really, it sounded to me a lot, and to be fair, I'm not as in depth in the hockey as everyone else living in Las Vegas these days, but they really pointed to the Golden Knights as kind of the spark that started all of this, that being in Las Vegas for kind of a season before PASPA really took off gave them the opportunity to think about things and talk about things. He talked about a bit about the idea of not letting MGM sportsbooks within walking distance of T-Mobile take bets. Do we remember this one?
Oh, I remember that one very clearly, yeah.
He admitted, he was like, listen, once someone kind of got me to understand you can bet from your chair, we agreed that we could toss that one out the window. So that was, the evolution of it. He leaned a little bit on that. You know what he would not talk about? And he would cut people off in the presser with some snippy, delightful remarks. Officiating. Was not touching it, wanted nothing to do with it. And when people did kind of push the issue on how much should you be investing in officiating now that sports betting is involved, someone actually asked, I believe it was Steve Bittenbender asked, if William Hill wanted to take a meeting with the NHL to talk about officiating, would that be something you're open to? And he's like, I have no idea why I would let an outside source come in and have any sort of input on our officials when we have all of the faith in the world on their integrity and the job that they do.
I know somebody in this group who just wrote a column about officiating and integrity over at Legal Sports Report. I would read that. I did not mention the NHL because they're still in the. I have not seen any massive officiating goof-ups yet this year.
Is it Tampa Bay Golden Knights last year?
It was the San Jose Golden Knights series
San Jose Golden Knights,
there was a major penalty called on the Golden Knights when they were winning 3-0 in the third period, which upon review later after the game was shown that it probably should not have been a major penalty, but the biggest issue was they didn't have the ability to review that by video during the game. Well, that turned into a 4-goal power play for the San Jose Sharks. They end up going on to win the series. And of course, you have a lot of Las Vegas media here who are very interested in that.
We're in a place where people are like, if you remember Game 5 of this series from 35 years ago, I think you would think differently.
And I'm sure he would. And Matt, when we talk about this with officiating, we just had this discussion with the NFL, right? We just had this discussion as to how officiating can affect betting markets. And that's why I think it's really interesting that someone would say William Hill to come in to talk to the NHL about officiating. I mean, that is those streams should not cross to put that in movie terms.
Yeah. Bettman shut it down. He's just like, absolutely not.
I will say this though. I mean, I'm okay with a guy coming out and saying like, you know what, I learned a little bit. And through learning a little bit about all of this, I've changed my opinion on what I've thought about things. There are so many people who are steadfast in their opinions, and it doesn't matter what you tell them about something, that they are going to not change their opinion on things. So at least he will come out and say something like that,
And he will be honest about the fact that money changed, right? That's it.
Sure.
When it comes down to it in the end, it comes down to there was money available, and we went after the money that was available because the laws changed, and we as a league are not the ones who make the laws. Now, you spent a lot of time fighting to keep the laws the way that they were, and that's the part that I think, Dustin, you can speak to pretty well in terms of the pivot for the NHL.
Yeah, and to their credit, they're not a part of the NBA, MLB, PGA Tour cabal that's going around asking for integrity fees. I've never heard Bettman actually wants nothing.
And he said,
yeah, I want nothing to do with it, right? So
it came up, someone asked about integrity fees, and before the question was even over, he's like, I've never asked for an integrity fee in my life. we will never ask for integrity fees.
No, I asked him about that during the NHL Finals last year, during when the Stanley Cup Finals were here, and he said, I've never had any question about the integrity of the people in our league, the integrity of our players, the integrity of our officials. So even if they were to be in on a royalty, which they are not, I like the fact that he went after the idea of an integrity fee, because that concept just in name has always been ridiculous.
I listened to Bettman, and I didn't get to listen to him. I'm listening through you, but I like that he seems honest about all of it. He never seems like. Doesn't he seem more honest about what
I think
he said? Like, yeah, I changed my mind. Like, that's okay.
And that's a huge step for any adult to take in America these days. And you know what? I like, too, that it's just like if someone brings up something about the integrity of his commission, he's like, absolutely not, shut it down. And then on the flip side, thinking about the idea of like a sportsbook going to the NHL and talking about how the officiating is kind of like a sports league wanting to come to the sports book and talk about what kind of sports betting they play. So I was glad to see that, like, if you're going to be willing to take that stand and also take the stand to stay out of sportsbooks business, I really wish more leagues realized this was the way to approach things.
Well, Jess, we're certainly going to have you stick around and talk to some of the guests that we have in here. Also, we certainly want to hit up the Chris Christie stuff as well that you were able to get into question. But we're going to keep rolling through with a lot of these guests here at G2E, guys.
Here at the G2E LSR MEGAPOD from the Glass Case of Emotion, we have Casey Clark from the AGA joining us, Senior Vice President of Strategic Communications. And we know that you're sort of on, about 30 or 40 minutes of sleep after a week of doing this and getting ready for...
That's what I got Saturday before I came out. So I'm still running on fumes.
I kind of figured that's about where you are right now. Tell me from your perspective, AGA puts on this show. How do you measure success when it comes to doing one of your biggest events of the year?
Well, look, it's not just our biggest event, because I think we take a lot of pride in the fact that it's the industry's biggest event. And so it's kind of hard for us to balance. It'd be easy for us to judge whether it's a success by the number of people who show up or the size of the show floor. I mean, those are good metrics. Like, you could rattle them off: 300,000 square feet, 30,000 people. But really, it's about how our members engage and what they think about it. So we'll know next week, But ultimately, everyone, by all reports, everyone's having a good show. So it's been a good time.
So when you look forward a bit, and we try to predict, as we do on these podcasts and talking head shows, about what the next 12 months or so are going to look like in the U.S. market, and obviously particularly for sports betting with where we are here on the LSR pod, what do you see coming, and what do you see in terms of priorities for the AGA within that?
Well, I think our priorities haven't shifted that much since, the court, even before the court ruled, our focus was on how do we create a viable legal market that can drive the illegal market out of business. And a lot of that has to do with how we create a competitive landscape. So are we giving consumers the right kind of access to the right kind of quality content at a tax rate that's feasible for people to actually have a business in that scenario? I'm not gonna pick on maybe one state in the East that is working hard to make that a challenging prospect for some of my members.
That someone may have called a rolling dumpster fire yesterday.
We'll leave the governor's comments to stand on their own. But I think our focus is on educating a whole lot of people who are really new to our business. So what's interesting to me is not only, our operators have been focused on this for a long time, because a lot of them are stemming from Vegas. The newcomers from Europe are also coming from a mature sports betting market. But I think what's interesting is we now have leagues and teams and arena owners and broadcasters and a whole swell of people who 18 months ago were not in the gambling business who are today. And I don't think that they have a full appreciation for the responsibility that comes with being in this business, or the scrutiny that comes with being in this business. They got a keen eye on the opportunity, but I think our job is really to educate everybody about what this really means and how we do it in a way that gets it right. I think the worst thing that we could do is kind of rush to market and try to force this down a bunch of states' throats that aren't ready for it, or get the wrong kind of regimes in place that wouldn't actually allow it to thrive. And if we mess that up, it's a real invitation for the federal government to do what they did with PASPA, which is to really screw it up. So let's just keep them out of our business by doing it the right way.
You mentioned the new people coming in from the leagues in Europe and other places. It wasn't that long ago that I feel like we were having these AGA conversations of how involved should online casinos be in the AGA. And now it feels like this might be an excessive way to say, like, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah.
But with this united front, do you feel like this integration between the live AGA partners and the online partners has really progressed further because of sports betting?
Probably. I mean, I think that what's interesting about the online market, at least as far as I can tell, is that it's stemming a lot from the brick and mortar guys, right? And a lot of the success is really coming from, even in New Jersey, where it's predominantly mobile business now. I think the success is still stemming from the brick and mortar casinos, and then coming out from there with our friends and new colleagues from the DFS business now operating books. But I think it is bringing people together in a way that we haven't had before, because I think we've got a common cause. And I think we all have a lot of hurdles we still have to cross. We're not going to know the outcome of the litigation around the Wire Act until the end of next year. So, you asked what's going to happen in the next 18 months, and nothing on that front. So, but a lot, I think, in terms of a lot of what we saw this year. You'll see state legislatures start to pre-file bills at the end of this year. You'll see a lot of activity early in the new year, and I don't think it'd be unrealistic for us to be having this conversation at G2E next year and be talking about half of the country with legal regulated markets.
How difficult, we're talking about the breadth of this and that it's going to keep expanding. You obviously have a lot of members, big and small, from all parts of the country. How do you balance the individual needs of your members? Just as an example, some of them will advocate for skins in certain states, and some will want a single skin model. How do you present a unified message for speaking on behalf of the whole industry?
It's the fun of working in a membership organization, right? They all want different things at different times. But I think that our goal and what our members ask of us to do is to be. Really be in the pre-competitive space, right? By the time you're deciding who's going to win which license or what's happening, that's not a business that the association should be in or can be in. I think we are in the market conditioning business. We are in the educating of legislatures and influencers in Washington or state capitals. We're in making relationships with leagues and teams and others so that they better understand what this business means in practice, and not just through the dollar signs that they're kind of viewing all this from. So it's a great question, and the answer is it's always a delicate balance, because we never want to be in the position of doing something that's contrary to one of our members' interests, but we've got to really figure out what's in the best interest of the industry and help people understand our industry a little better. What you'll hear Bill Miller, our CEO, talk about a lot is when you go into communities where there's casinos, and you guys know this, they really understand who we are and what we're bringing to the table. A lot of people who are new to our business, and sports betting is bringing a lot of new attention to us, don't get it. And there's still a lot of old stereotypes that we're fighting against, and I think there's a lot that we're always going to be having to struggle with. But the more and more we have the opportunity to actually articulate the benefits that people are deriving from engaging with our members, that's the right role for us.
I think that's a really interesting point for what we do with Legal Sports Report, where we spend a lot of time watching regulatory and legislative hearings. And I think one of the things in the past 12 months especially that we've seen is how much education there really is to do at both of those levels. And I think we've been surprised at just how basic some of that education has had to be. What have you found out there, especially as you've gone around with the state legislatures and regulatory bodies?
The same. The same as you. If you look at our research, we put out more research than anybody can read, but I think it's providing valuable information. I don't mean to detract from it. And Dave Foreman will have my head when I get back to the office. But I think what you find is that there's still a lot of misinformation, right? They think that people think sports betting is legal now. They just think that's true, and they don't understand that if they can go into the App Store and download a Bovada app, that they're not. That doesn't mean that it's legal, because they're getting money through Venmo or PayPal, right? And so there's a lot of consumer education that has to happen. There's a lot of, from our perspective, influencer education, so that they are actually making sure their consumers and constituencies are aware of the complications here. And we have to give them a good option, right? Otherwise, they're not going to switch. And so we have to make sure that what we're putting in place is a viable market that allows them the safeguards of a regulated market without, detracting from the experience.
You mentioned those who are new to the industry. I thought it was very interesting that we're talking right now, right after a panel with the NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman and Gary Bettman led a panel where he talked about lessons learned. It's a very interesting perspective to be coming from. Last year, Kenny Gersh from Major League Baseball was here, had what we'll call a spirited discussion with Sarah Slane during one of those panels. So specifically with the leagues as newer partners to all of this, what have you found in working with them over the last couple of years here?
Look, I think Commissioner Bettman said it right. It's been an evolution, and he was smart. I think in the NHL particularly has been pretty progressive as they've approached this. Clearly, after they saw, they were reading the tea leaves. But I think as a league, they've been much more progressive in what they're pushing for from a policy standpoint. And so I think what you've seen with the leagues is them try to figure out how they're going to monetize this business, which is where they started. And in fairness, they're running a business too, and that's probably where I would be if I was on their side of this equation. But it's a real evolution, and I think that we've built strong relationships with those leagues. We're not always going to agree on how this should be worked out, but that's true in any commercial relationship, whether that be in our business or somebody else. So I don't think it's unique to us, but it's an interesting proposition because it's happening probably in front of a lot more eyes, right?
You were talking about education in the illegal market. Matt King basically said the same of FanDuel up on the panel, that it's their job and the league's job, and even at the state level, the teams and their PR teams are working on educating. What do you think the AGA's role in kind of rounding up all of these efforts to talk about the black market in a more educated way is?
Look, I think G2E is a good example of what we do well, which I think is convening. We did it at the Sports Betting Summit in March. We'll do it again next March. We'll do it in this session here in the Sports Betting Symposium. I think brings the right kind of people together to start having those kind of conversations. But my sense is we all have a responsibility to play, and we should all be working together to do it. So I think AGA has a really important job to make sure that people understand why that's important, right? Why working together, why getting it right, why the common enemy here is the illegal market. If there's a focus for the federal government to get involved here, it's there, right? Let's actually focus regulatory scrutiny on how we drive the illegal market out of business, because it's pervasive and it's predatory, and let's kill it, right? But without working together, and I think that's what Matt said on the panel just a little while ago, we're never going to get there. So it's scale.
You talk about evolution of things, and one thing that we've certainly had an evolution of over time is the integrity fee, which became the royalty, which has sort of pulled a Terminator T1000 shift into official data mandates now. As we look at the next 12 months of legislative priorities with the AGA, I know you spent a lot of time dealing with that particular issue this past year. What do you see as the future of that and other legislative priorities in 2020 state legislatures?
Well, the small victory lap we can take is that the leagues are going to 0 for 18 and passing and getting integrity fees in any kind of bill, right? That was a clear interest in just taking revenue, and I don't think that there's any precedent in our business or any other business in this country that would suggest that one commercial entity should have to deflect revenue to another just because they want it. I mean, there was never a great rationale, right? I think data fees are an interesting thing. Our position has been, and we've talked about it before, that all of this should be done in contract, not in statute. And there's been more than 50 private partnerships done since PASPA was overturned. That's happening, right? People want official data. People want, latency in our business is a killer. So we want that partnership. We're going to have that partnership. And I think you've seen a lot of the deals come out that actually have the gaming operators buying the official data, but it's all via partnership and contract rather than in state or federal statute.
Well, Casey, you are remarkably lucid right now for a man who has been going through what you've gone through for the past week in terms of putting on this show. Highly caffeinated and yet eloquent as always. Casey Clark from the AGA, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me, guys.
I'd like to welcome in Keith O'Loughlin he's the Vice President of Sportsbook and Platform at Scientific Games. I'm sure a very busy man here at G2E. We appreciate your time. And how's the conference been going for you so far? It's a question you've already been answering 10 times, but we'll make you answer it one more time.
The conference is great. It's great to see it's the progress in the 12 months since last year. Last year was the first conference post the passport repeal, and so people were still getting their head around sports betting and how it was going to be, and there was a lot of talk around just the technology and platforms. And whereas now I feel the conversations at the show and people in the interest is about, okay, we've got the technology, or we're getting the technology. How are we going to win? How are we going to engage with customers? How are we going to resonate with customers? What kind of products do customers want in terms of the sports available and markets and those kind of features? So I feel the conversation has moved on a lot in 12 months. It was really exciting to be at the show and engage with people.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear that's evolved that much, you think, in a year, because we constantly hear from people from Europe, but we don't know what we're talking. Nobody knows what they're talking about. That's true to some extent, I think. And so it's interesting that you think people have really caught on a lot. Like we were talking to Kambi earlier, and like people know who Kambi is now. I think is like they're not like there's a known quantity, and like just knowing the terminology of sports betting and what's going on. It's interesting to hear that you think it's evolved that much just in a year.
Yeah, well, it's funny, like when you say, that European businesses, have maybe said, you don't know what you're talking about over here, we know about sports betting. Actually, when you look at, like, sports in the US, it's a different proposition than anywhere else in the world, right? You got, I was at a hockey game the other night, and right from when you're walking up towards the stadium, you've got cheerleaders who are walking in, making, a razzmatazz and a great spectacle before it, and then right throughout the game, it's a full-on frenzy of entertainment, right? That kind of entertainment that sports gives in the US isn't really done to the same degree in the rest of the world. And so sports betting is something that is really complementary to how sports works, and I think fits in perfectly with the US. But when I say fits in perfectly, it is different, and that's why I think the US customer, from the US sports fan, the casual bettor and casual gamer, wants something that's a little different than is anywhere else in the world. So it's about the experience that there is in the rest of the world, but making it US first. It's not about what you've got to sell and products that you've got on platforms, what the customer wants, and make sure you give it to them in the way they want it.
Tell us more about what you've seen specifically. We know you have set up with Caesars, with New Jersey, and with Mississippi. What have you learned in the time since you've had those deals about the U.S. market, and how has that evolved here over the last 12 to 18 months?
So I think there are a few things. I think the customers who you acquire from an operator are very loyal. They're more expensive to acquire because of that loyalty. They have a much higher lifetime value. There's a strong propensity to cross-sell into gaming if gaming is legal, much more so than anywhere else in the world. Customers are not promiscuous. So, if you throw $50 and say, join us for $50, they're like, I already have my operator, and so they have that loyalty, and they're not just easily swayed by just some cash. So I think those are pieces that are very, very different than in other markets and other jurisdictions. I think customers, from a retail perspective, really embrace sports betting in a way that I haven't seen anywhere else in the world. Customers in busy books are happy to queue for an hour and a half just to place their wager. You just don't get that in other places. Now, to be fair, I think they're doing that because when they're in a book, they're seeing all the pictures, they're seeing everything there. So it's not like they're just waiting in line outside a store in the rain to wait to get in to get the wager on. It's still a fabulous experience.
Yeah, because you're saying, like, nobody's going to go to a Ladbrokes and say, there's 100 people in line. I'm like, F off. I'm going to place my bet online, right? People do it here.
That's interesting. Yeah, absolutely.
So, to piggyback on that question, I think what's interesting is you talk about the loyalty of, especially that casino customer that you said is a higher value player because of the ability to cross-sell. That's something that I don't know that every operator is going to have the ability to do, right? A lot of the sports leagues and so on, they're bringing in a more casual player and trying to get them, play at lower stakes and so on like that. It feels to me like a segmented market in some ways where there are different types of customers that you're trying to acquire. How do you prioritize those? How do you figure out, how to help your partners in doing that?
So I think there's two things. I think part of the reason, it's not just that they're higher value casino customers. I think the fact that customers have only one account or maybe two accounts means that they're concentrating all of their spend in those. If you look in other jurisdictions that are maybe more mature markets, customers have 5 or 6 wallets, so the spend that they have gets spread. I think that the essence of working on a segmented market like that is you just have to give really good, easy experiences to customers. And like there's other industries that I think that we can learn from. 15 years ago, actually 12 years ago, if we were sitting here, everybody in this conference would be on a BlackBerry. Right? 2 years later, people were on iPhones. Why? Because they were so much easier to use, even though they still had the same amount of functionality. So you had high-end users, you had low-end users, you had kids, you had executives, all using iPhones. Why? Because they just made it easy to use and easy to consume. And I think from a sports betting perspective, there has been in some respects, a complexity. You're just going to walk into a book, and if you've never had a wager before, it's quite a daunting experience. So I think in the way to deal with that, a segmented market, is to just make it really easy for customers to access your product.
From that supplier perspective, how do you do that in working with your customers in terms of giving them customizable type options and being able to adjust on the fly as they see their customers and their markets develop?
From our perspective, well, we work with the top sports betting operators around the world. And in every market, it's a little different. So we work with sports bet in Australia. And sports bet in Australia can't do any in-play because it's not legal there. So even though they're using the same tools, we give them and they've developed themselves as well alongside us, all of the ways to give their customers that nuanced product that they need, right? And so our job is to give all of the tools and building blocks to our operator customers who will resonate with theirs. You just got to walk up the strip here in Vegas and you see all the different brands, and they all stand for something a little different. And they all have a slightly different proposition. From a sports betting perspective, that brand needs to resonate through what they've got. And what we're doing is giving them all of the different tools, all the different building blocks, and the support, knowledge, training, operational expertise, whatever they need to make sure that they can bring that brand essence that resonates with the customers and deliver it to market.
We should definitely hit on the Open Sports was the spring tech stack. Tell me a little bit about that and the reception to that, and maybe the challenges of getting that up and going. And it's just the next iteration of your tech stack. But
yeah, so our Open Sports product set is the full turnkey proposition that will do digital and retail sports betting for an operator and everything that you need. So in essence, there are three component parts. There's a core sports betting engine which manages all of the markets, manages all of the integrity of being able to take a wager at a price. At busy times, when we've got all the sports that a customer can place a wager on, at busy times, there can be 150,000 price changes per minute. Okay. So the core of that is making sure that we can show the integrity that every customer and that the price that they've taken is the price that's there. That's the core of what it is. The second part of the stack is what we call Open Trade powered by Donbest Sports. Last year at G2E, we announced our acquisition of Donbest Sports, and we've built out our managed trading services business based on that cornerstone over the year. So we're now offering 200,000 events in play per year, and a full, up to 100, 150 markets for each each individual event. That's a huge part of what we do, and we do it for customers now right across the world with the managed trading service. And the final piece of it is what we call Open Engage. And Open Engage is the component which encompasses all of the digital touchpoints, that gateway to customers. So that includes our retail SSBTs, our retail terminals, and what we call our promote display. So the in-venue display which shows pictures of games alongside all of the live prices that are there. We've also, alongside that, we've got a suite of mobile apps. We've got and digital, both in terms of desktop and in terms of mobile. And within that, we've got some what we find is really innovative pieces, like doing scoreboards, visualizations, and ways to enable customers to really interact with the product and with their sport, and to get their heart racing and fluttering, which is what the essence of what this is all about.
Yeah, you get that at your booth, which is a palatial, as they say here, and I've seen what you do with the sports book and the retail. It's cool for sure. Really appreciate your time. I'm sure you're a busy man. I appreciate you taking a few minutes to come on the podcast with us.
No, I loved it. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time, guys.
Welcome back into the G2E Mega Podcast from here in our little glass cage of emotion. Happy to have Dan Shapiro from William Hill here to talk about partnerships with us now. How you doing, man? How's your convention going?
I'm doing well. It's been a good convention. Sports betting is a hot topic, so always exciting and fun stuff at G2E.
Well, let's get into the biggest news that your company has had of late and the partnership you have going in Washington, D.C. with Ted Leonsis, with the arena there. How did that come about? How did you guys go about making that deal in the first place?
It was a long process. It probably started about a year ago. We got to know Ted and some of the guys from Monumental Sports just through some mutual introductions from the industry. Got to know them, really liked what they were doing, really kind of felt a really good sort of chemistry in working with them. And they ended up putting out an RFP, I think it was late last year, sort of a formal process to look for providers. And, we were one of the probably a handful of companies that were involved in looking at it and submitting a bid. And, right from the start, because like I said, we felt a really good chemistry with those guys. They had a vision for how the sports book should look. Ted Leonsis is a visionary for sure, and really, tech and data-driven, kind of guy, and we kind of really got to talking about some great ideas for the space, and ended up being selected from what I understand among a few different potential operators, and here we are. It was 9 months later, I think, from the RFP being issued to signing the deal and announcing it. So really
along those lines, this is a deal that has obviously a huge retail component because of being inside the arena, and we spent so much time talking about mobile acquisition, but there's obviously still quite a bit of value to being able to get those retail customers in, and then of course being able to convert some of them over to mobile. How do you look at this deal from that perspective?
Right. So DC is a unique animal because you got mobile permitted within the arena. So 18,000 or so people going to be in the arena for most events, and you've got a 2-block radius around Capital One Arena. If you know that area, it's a very highly trafficked area. The arena sits on top of the Gallery Place metro station. Lots of restaurants and bars around there. So we think people are going to come into the sports book or come into the arena, hear about the app, sign up for it. Hopefully, place bets not only before the game, but play in-play product throughout the game, not only on what's in front of them, but on a variety of other sports, whether it's football or baseball or whatever it is. And so we're really thinking that, it's going to be a good retail experience, but it's going to be the focal point of getting people sign up for the app, throughout the arena. And DC is a little bit unique because the lottery is going to have initially a monopoly on mobile outside of the sports venues. We think we're going to give them a really good experience, when they're in that venue in the 2-block radius.
This is obviously still kind of a new thing for us here in the States, this union between the operators and the arenas or the leagues. Can you, it kind of started slow in New Jersey with some of the lounges, the activation points. Now we have a full-scale sports book coming to DC. Just kind of, where do you see this going in the next couple of years? You see more of this spreading throughout the country? You think there'll be opportunities in arenas around the country? Yeah,
certainly the sports lounge concept where you can, potentially show odds and have ambassadors to educate about your project, about your product. I think that's something we'll see a lot. We've had a lot of teams reaching out to us about that. As far as the actual betting in the venue, like DC had, I don't think it'll be quite the norm, at least in the short term. I think DC was a little bit unique because there's no casinos there. Illinois, may or may not have been a bit of a one-off. But, in other states where you have a really strong, commercial casino component and tribal gaming as well, you might not see it for a while. So, we'll see how it plays out. And I think a lot of people are looking at Capital One Arena and the other venues in Washington when they get going and seeing really how it works and what the experience is like. So it's really going to be a lab for sports teams and the leagues in general.
How are people, when you start talking about potential partnerships today, how are they talking to you differently than they would have been in May or June of last year? How has the evolution been for you?
It's been pretty striking, well, if you go back before PASPA, right? I mean, doing a deal with a sports betting company was like, taboo, really, to be honest with you. And I think one of the most surprising things since PASPA was overturned is really the embracing of sports betting, not only by the leagues but the teams around them. I mean, it's a complete new category for teams looking for sponsorship and ad revenue, and we've got products and customers that overlap quite a bit with what they're doing. So it makes perfect sense. I think it was just the stigma and the taboo of a betting company doing something with a team or a league. But for a company like William Hill, it's nothing new. We've been doing this in the UK for a long, long time. In fact, betting and gaming companies and sport are really married over there. So it's nothing new.
Yeah, it's interesting in a way because I would think doors must open a lot quicker and a lot easier than they used to, right?
Oh, sure. I mean, I can't tell you how many LinkedIn requests I get from teams around the country, whether sports betting is legal in their state or not. They're looking for revenue and dollar signs, and when you got a deal like Capital One, Monumental appearing on the Washington Post or Wall Street Journal, I'm sure the owner of the team calls. LegalSportsReport.com. I'm sure the owner sees that, calls the partnerships guys and say, hey, we should be talking to William Hill too. So that's what's been happening.
Well, Dan, I know that we didn't manage our time particularly well. This is a great conversation that I would love to carry on a little bit longer, but you're a man in demand here at G2E. Dan Shapiro from William Hill, thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, anytime. Thank you.
Here at the G2E LSR Mega Podcast from right on the floor, we have Charles Cohen, the IGT sports betting guru. Don't mind me. It's not on your business card, but we're going to give you that term for.
Do I need to cross my legs and?
You don't. Well, in our little area here, you need to do whatever you can
to make yourself small.
For those of you who are obviously not privileged to see what's going on here, we have something that's like half a college dorm room where we're putting everybody together.
The size of a dinner table, and we have seven people in here.
Our
That's not even a dinner table, guys. So we're giving people
sorry,
false.
you have a dinner table this size?
No, I mean the room. The room is the size of a dinner table.
That is not a dinner table.
We're going to, honestly, Charles, we're going to start paying him. We're not quite there yet, but we are going to pay Eric eventually. Tell us more about, Charles, from your perspective, what your G2E is like this year versus what your G2E was like last year as the sports betting market has evolved here in the U.S.
So G2E as a whole this year, I mean, I don't know if you guys are feeling this, is way busier. Yeah. There's a lot of energy. It's really crowded. Don't try getting in at 10 o'clock in the morning because it's it's like being on an airport on Christmas Eve. But it's a really interesting experience this year. And from a sports betting perspective, well, this time last year it was all new, hey, sports betting, and now it's actually a real industry. Yeah, the whole industry has sprung up from almost nothing, really. I mean, not that Nevada is nothing, but outside of Nevada, it's just incredible. So we're live in 10 states now, and there's 12, 13 in total, and there's probably going to be twice that again in the next couple of years. So it's amazing, and everyone is talking about sports betting.
Charles, I'm curious because we can see a good test case for how the market has developed in one of your markets, in Rhode Island, where a state that began with only a retail presence and quickly saw after a year that they wanted to get into the mobile market and that they were leaving a lot of revenue behind. How have those conversations developed as you've talked to your partners and folks in other states? Well,
everybody recognizes the mobile potential. They can see the figures out of New Jersey. Soon you're going to have really solid data in a couple of other states as well. And you'll be able to understand that the two things that really matter are, one, mobile revenue is incremental to land-based, does not cannibalize, not a single dollar, right? Which is really important. It's one of the things that is holding it back in a lot of places. And the other is that it is safe and it can be done responsibly, which is also important because regulators in particular are worried that someone's going to go over the border and place a bet and then everybody goes to jail. And that's not happening. And so the fear factor goes away and everybody gets a bit more comfortable with it. And when they get comfortable with it, then they're happy to expand it. And, I'm hearing rumors that maybe states that have got on-premise mobile are going to expand, and there's all sorts of excitement building, but it's all really positive. As yet, there haven't really been any major negatives, certainly no full stops. Every state that's done it has done it pretty well in their own way, and they've done it in the right way for them, and it's amazing to watch.
We were actually talking about this earlier, and you kind of alluded to it right there, so I'm actually curious, what has the education process been like through these states and the regulators and whatnot? You mentioned, not really knowing, thinking that they could, place a bet just as they step across the board and things like that. How's the education process been to let people know just how accurate all this stuff is and how safe all these things are?
So at the beginning, it was actually quite hard because they didn't have anything to reference. They don't really, I can understand this as well, that references from other parts of the world aren't really worth very much. You need tangible evidence, and so you have to literally go and show them that it works. So you have to show them the geolocation solution, and actually companies like GeoComply have done a really good job over quite a number of years doing the education piece around that element of it. But there's other aspects to it as well, like payments and KYC and underage play and security and all that kind of stuff. And most of the regulators and the legislators are quite open to the facts. They want to know what the details are because they don't want to make a mistake. But they've also are able to look over to here, to Nevada, and see what's been going on here for quite a number of years very successfully with those technologies and learn from that. And so the states learn from each other. They reference each other, but then at the end of the day, they make their own decisions to go their own way. But yeah, they're all being educated because if they weren't, we wouldn't have so many states opening up.
Yeah, I think we've noticed some of the same just in tracking legislation over the past year, that the conversation has gotten a little more intelligent. The next level of conversation is being had in state houses, so that's kind of encouraging. Wondering though, you mentioned that sports betting is on the tip of everyone's tongue, but that's not all you guys do, obviously, in your business. Wondering how the last year has been for the other segments of your business and how, the expansion of sports betting dovetails into your grander business plan.
Our grander business plan, yes. Yeah. I'm constantly reminded that even if we absolutely knock it out of the park with sports betting, it's just like a nice little line item on the financial reports. It's not a big deal. No, it's strategically important for the company because it's a service which our core customers want, either lotteries and casinos. And the concern for us, of course, is that if we are weak or missing from one particularly important business vertical, then that undermines the value proposition overall. So, in fact, one of the things we've done this year is we've demonstrated the integration of the sports betting platform to our Advantage casino management system, which translates in English to you can play sports betting on a slot machine.
Yeah.
Right? It's that kind of stuff that makes the world go round for us. And even though it might be some time before we ever see that in an actual customer environment, it's the fact that we're able to think like that which matters to the customers. So they come to us and say, oh, we know you do this, do you have a sports betting offering? And if we say no, that's a problem.
So along those lines, I'm curious how the Play Sports product has evolved, because I know from the supplier side, everyone's challenge, especially over the last 12 to 18 months, has been adapting what has worked elsewhere to what works in the US and giving partners the opportunity to customize and make adjustments on the fly and so on. How has that worked from IGT's perspective?
So we were very fortunate because, and I think we seem to remember discussing this last year, was that we had already done this in Nevada 4 years previously, made all of the investments, made all of this, well, not all of the mistakes, most of the mistakes, and already Americanized the solution and already put in place the infrastructure to be able to deliver and manage it. Turns out, of course, most states are done very differently to Nevada, but the core platform underneath it is the same. And the question about customization, that's a decision, that's almost like a business decision, really. So if you look at something like SPTech or Kambi, they have a very different business model to us. They have a different architecture to us. They're built to deliver value in a different way. We are very much at the other end of the spectrum, all about customization. You can control, change pretty much anything, plug in pretty much anything, and we're happy to facilitate that. And we're set up to do it. Now, that means that we have probably got a different cost base, we've got a different technology base, but that's the way the thing works. And there's clearly a market for it, and it's going very well. But then there are markets for other approaches as well, and that's fine too.
So when you look at the U.S. market and whatever anticipation you had of what it would look like beginning from PASPA to now, have your preconceptions fit? And if they haven't, where have they differed?
I think I shared most people's view that it was going to be a slower rollout and it was going to be more homogenous. So most states we thought most states would probably follow the Nevada regulatory model or the New Jersey regulatory model. And it's turned out to be a lot faster than people thought. And regulators have taken a very localized approach to their rulemaking and their certification process and how it all works. So that's made it, on the one hand, harder and more complicated, but it's also meant there's a lot more of it. And I now kind of am in the camp that says, I think this is going to be a lot bigger than anybody thinks it's going to be.
Really?
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
Well, because sports betting has a sort of a level of social acceptance that you don't see in most other forms of gaming. I mean, you certainly get it in something like bingo, and to some extent in poker.
Poker, yeah.
Right, because it's a social activity that everybody understands. And people also understand that at the moment, people are sports betting anyway, but they're doing it illegally. Whether they want to admit it in public or not, that's what's happening. And so now, all of a sudden, the Supreme Court has given the states the authority to actually regulate this activity, and the other states have shown them the pathways to doing it, and the political barriers, if they exist, are much lower. Well, not the political barriers, but the social, cultural acceptance of sports betting as an activity are lower. And so the arguments tend to be technical arguments and around things like taxes and whether you have to register for mobile on property and all that kind of stuff. There's very few arguments now about the principle of whether sports betting is an acceptable thing for the citizens of one particular state.
And I find something very interesting within what you just said about the social acceptance and the social activity of it, because to me, there's a big question there in terms of retail and mobile development, because you see where some folks are trying to create the retail environment that is a more social environment and to bring people together around this activity, whereas the mobile activity is inherently a little more isolated. Do you think, you talked about the fact that mobile is ultimately incremental. Do you see those tracks kind of moving in parallel, or do you see them being complementary to each other?
I think that's a really good question. So look at it this way. It's a different way of looking at it, if I may. We live in an experience economy. People pay for experiences. And the type of experience that they're paying for is different when they're placing a wager in a retail sports book than when they're doing it on their phone. But the interesting thing about the phone is, where are they when they're doing that? Okay, now, I've seen some data on this, and I'll tell you what's interesting. They're not all sitting at home. Right? There's a lot of mobile betting in New Jersey that happens in sports bars.
Sure.
Right? And at games. And in social environments. It's not all domestic. And if it is domestic, you know what? There might be a bunch of people all sitting around in someone's house watching the game, all betting on their mobiles at the same time. So just because there's a one-to-one relationship between you and your smartphone doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually on your own. And so I think that what's probably happening is that people are buying into a different type of experience when they're doing it. And that's why mobile is incremental, because it's not stopping people from going to the casino. It's just giving them other ways to do the same thing.
My God, might we be cracking the holy grail of the younger generation and finding something experiential that would bring more of a social aspect together? I'm being a bit tongue-in-cheek here when I say that, but I find that fascinating to see that data that says that there is more of a connection among people while they're placing bets on sports. I mean, I can say that, Eric and I have gone to a sports book and sat there, and we don't go up to the window. We have our apps right in front of us when we do
that's
it.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that's being recorded as mobile wagers.
Right.
So I know from one particular situation, I can't say exactly who it is, but over 40% of the mobile wagers are taking place on property.
Wow.
That's such a tease. I mean, I love the fact that you give us that piece of information, but then not being able to share the details of that information just destroys the reporter soul inside me.
Okay, so look, it almost doesn't matter where it is because unless you think that people are fundamentally different in one state to another, they're just people. So they're behaving in exactly the way that we are giving them the option to behave.
So the legislators behave very differently from state to state, but the customers, we can say, are probably fairly similar people when we look at them.
People are people.
People are
I
people.
love that.
That's profound.
You know what? That's actually, we're going to take that into our other podcast, our self-help podcast later on that we're doing. Charles Cohen from IGT. Apologize. I have the IMG booklet right in front of me as we talk about that from IGT. I know I have to put $1 in the swear jar for saying that, but thank you very much for your time.
All right. Thank you very much, guys. Enjoy.
Welcome back to the Glass Cage of Emotion here on the G2E floor. LSR podcast with
MEGAPOD.
The MEGAPOD. Sorry for those of you who are not sitting with us. That was Matt Brown from Off Mic. Very disappointed that he does not have a microphone in front of him. It is his natural state. Jess Welman, Derrick Ramsey joining us as well as Ed Miller, founder of Deck Prism, author of The Logic of Sports Betting. How you doing, man?
Hey, how you doing? Thank you for having me.
We are happy to have you in. All right, what has the G2E experience been like for you this year so far?
So this is actually the first time that I've really done the event as like a business owner, and it's definitely different. Like there's we had a lot of meetings with people and discussing kind of the future of sports betting, and it's been fun.
So tell us more about the current venture and what you guys are doing out here on the floor.
Sure. So we started Deck Prism Sports. We really started the business, I would say, on the day that the Supreme Court decision happened. We had my partners and I. We have a few partners. We've been building in-play sports models for American sports like NFL, college football, college basketball, and baseball for years, really. And really the day that Supreme Court decision came down, we kind of said, well, there's a turning point here. Where are we going to take the business? And we decided, well, what we would try to do is basically supply the industry with good, strong models for the American sports. So that's the way we've directed the industry, and we're trying to supply lines to really everyone in America who wants to take bets on in-play American sports.
So for people who are kind of outside looking in on this, you would be a direct competitor to, say, like a Sport Radar or something like that.
Well, I actually don't see Sport Radar as a direct competitor because I see companies like Sport Radar and BetGenius and stuff. They're data providers. They have scouts. They send scouts to the game. They have hardware, and we're not trying to get into that business. Frankly, other people could do it better than we do. We're in the analytics business, so really we're very focused on trying to do A, get the analytics right, and B, get the trading part right. So there's a lot to in-play lines making that involves gathering data during the game, and it's not just the game state data. It's not just the score. It's not just where the ball is. It's some of it, especially with football, has to do with the eye test. Really seeing how the game is playing out and incorporating that information into your model, because really once you get to offering a product to the entire country, that's what bettors are doing against you. If you're the operator, right, and somebody's making an in-play bet, certainly anyone who takes it seriously, they're watching the game and they're using the information from the game that they're watching to inform their bets. And if your model, whatever your product is for offering in-play lines to the public, doesn't take that information into account also, you can get beat very easily. So really that's our core competency, is we're able to A, do the analytics, build the models, and B, gather that kind of like squishier, less tangible data, in real time, and incorporate that into the model to build the strongest line we can.
I assume that maybe gives you a little advantage in latency too over folks that are trying to manually input some of the game state.
So it's interesting that you say that because especially for American sports, the latency is kind of a tricky question, because on one hand, there's people say, okay, well we have the data straight from the arena, where the lowest latency. Well, what does that mean exactly? So let's say in football, right? A big time for in-play betting, especially in American football, is at the timeout. As soon as the game goes to timeout, game game goes to commercial, that's almost like the cue, look at your phone and start betting, right? Well, what happens before commercial? A lot of times it's a punt. So let's say there's a punt, and then the other team receives the ball, and then a flag gets thrown. Well, if you watch enough football, you kind of know what that flag is. You kind of know where the next game state is going to be. As soon as you see that flag come out, you could say, okay, they're going to get the ball to the 14-yard line, right? If you watch football. Yep. Well, that does not come in on that data stream that they have the ball on the 14-yard line, often for 15, 20, 25 seconds, right? So if your idea of latency is, well, I'm going to just wait for the data stream to tell me what the new game state is and then make my number, you're going to be 25 seconds behind someone who's watched football all their life and sees the flag and says the ball's at the 14, right? So this is the kind of like hack, I would say, that we're doing on latency, and why you can't just say, oh, I got a data feed in, data feed out. It doesn't work like that, because you could do a faster job with people who know the sport and know what to look for. You can also do and then obviously just impacting how you make the line, how you handicap the game, what you're seeing, what the stats are coming in, all that stuff matters. So that's really what we're trying to fuse together to put out the best possible product.
And you explain that in a very easy to approach way, and I'm reading your book right now, The Logic of Sports Betting, and I think you do a good job of breaking down the more analytical side to explain to people kind of how to approach this in a simpler way, but from a more informed perspective. How has that discussion developed for you over the past couple of years in trying to take a sports betting market that can be very difficult for some people to approach and understand and try to simplify it for folks? Right,
sure. So I've actually, my career before this was I wrote a ton of poker books. It was I just like writing is really the short answer for why I fell into that. And I really like that writing lifestyle. I like communicating. I like educating. And my perception was, so we did early, I think we published it in May. We published a book called The Logic of Sports Betting. I published with my partner in the business, Matthew Davidow. And I feel like there was a big education gap. The book kind of spawned out of a lot of discussions I had on Twitter. I spend way too much time on Twitter, and as do we all. Yeah, right. Yeah. And I just kind of saw the same things coming up over and over again, the same misconceptions that people had about how sports betting works. How do lines get made? Well, people think there's, 8 million nerds in the basement of the, Orleans casino or something, madly scribbling. No, that's not where the lines come from. Or, they think, oh, well, the book is just trying to balance action and they're 50. I mean, there's just a lot of, misinformation about how the industry works. And honestly, from when you have an industry that's really coming into the country for the first time, a lot of people, everybody is familiar with sports betting, but as far as the nuts and bolts of actually how the industry works, this is new to most Americans. It's new to bettors, it's new to regulators, it's new to, honestly, casino managers, a lot of, it's just a lot of this stuff is brand new to these people. And I said, well, why don't I just kind of try to educate everybody and kind of increase, I'm trying to bring up the level of discussion so that we can talk about the real stuff and the real issues and make this better.
So I know you from your poker books, because my background, and I think a lot of us in this room have a poker background. And you did kind of come in really early on that, where the education point was in a much different place than it is, say, now.
Right.
So do you think that in terms of possibly future sports books that you might see that same kind of trajectory and development in thinking, where Joe average person will start thinking at a higher and higher level about sports betting the way they did about poker?
I definitely think that's going to be true. I definitely one phenomenon I definitely think happened with poker, and I think was inevitable, is that the kind of, as you said, Joe average, or the recreational player, definitely started to understand more and more about the game as time went on. Just all of this. Maybe they would read a book here or there. They got some, but just being around. You watch it on TV. What do the commentators say? Well, in 2004, what they say is very different from what they say in 2019.
This is a raise.
Yes. Right. So the amount of information out there is just exploded in poker, and that's raised the level of the recreational customer. I do think that's going to happen in sports betting. I think a lot of times with the industry, kind of cynically, I think the industry kind of characterizes recreational bettors as like, the British word is mug, is what they call them. But, people who, are basically flipping coins, purely flipping coins, right? I don't think that's the reality today, and I certainly don't think that's likely to be the reality going forward, especially when you're talking about a point spread, like an NFL point spread, a huge market. I mean, it is more or less a coin flip because those markets are so deep and so liquid, and the price discovery process works so well, it's very hard to beat those markets. So yeah, when people bet those markets, basically they're flipping coins, almost everybody is. But that's not what operators are offering. Operators are offering in-play bets, right? They're offering props, they're offering derivatives, they're offering all kinds of these other bets that are priced really not through price discovery so much as models through people like us, that sit in a room and watch the game and put a price out. Well, I could be wrong. And the fact is that the average recreational customer is going to become better and better and better over time at identifying where the mistakes are. They're just going to develop an intuition for it. They're going to say, well, that's not right, and they're going to bet it. So that's the other thing. We're trying to get out ahead of that and say, well, let's put the quality in now. Let's do a good job now on pricing all this stuff, and stop pretending that all your customers are going to be mugs, because that's not the reality now, and it's definitely not going to be the reality going forward. And, just if everybody tries to do a better job, that, we'll have a stronger industry.
Do you think, kind of as a follow-up to that, in the poker world, there's a bit of a fall-off in recreational players now because the amount of work and the amount of effort you have to put in to beat small stakes is just not very fun and appealing to people? Is that possible to happen in sports betting, where the books are so advanced, the metrics and the analytics are so advanced, that if I'm a person who doesn't follow models and I just, I like to bet on teams that are birds, I know that I'm never going to win in the long term, so I'm not going to play?
Well, so you're not going to win in the long term if that's your approach to sports betting, and you won't today, and you won't in the future either. But the amount you lose is really, if you're flipping coins, you lose the hold on the market. And the other thing that we could do is as the analytics get better, you could actually reduce the hold. I mean, this is one thing, for an in-play market, I think it's about engagement. Right? I think in-play betting, I think everybody's, eyes are wide open. Why do operators like in-play betting? Well, they see volume. They see betting volume, right? I see engagement. I see a customer experience where someone wants to come back and keep playing because there's new and interesting things to think about and to bet on and to have action on. And the thing is, if you want people to keep coming back over and over and over again, if you want the volume, you have to give them a reasonable bet. You can't try to hold 20% on those bets. People just won't come back to it. So so in order to have a reasonable hold, you need to have good analytics. Now, once you have a reasonable hold, they're not going to get killed. The reason why they get killed in poker is because once you get really left behind the skill gap, you aren't losing 4%. You're losing that 15, 20. I mean, you're losing that much faster rate that it becomes not fun anymore. And now you're like, well, forget it. This happened faster with online poker, which I knew it would because online poker is,
everything happens faster.
Exactly. It's interesting that you say that, Ed, that people aren't going to come back if it's a 20% hold product. Have you been consulting with Washington, D.C. at all? Because they might need to hear that perspective from you before they put their product in. Ed Miller's the founder of Deck Prism and the author of The Logic of Sports Betting, as well as a number of other books on poker as well. This is a fascinating conversation that we could keep going for quite a long time on. Thanks for coming in for a while.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So I wanted to do a follow-up from the question you asked, Jess, to Ed about, whenever you look at the poker and how casual people, once you figure out, I'm not really good at this, I'm going to go away. And I think one of the things the reason I think it's different in sports betting is there's a time commitment involved to losing in poker as well. So it's not only do you lose your money, but you have now also lost 3, 4, 5 hours of your time, right? And so at least with sports betting, if you want to be bad at it, you can't just flip open your app and 30 seconds later you place a bet and walk away and then that's the end of it, right? There's hardly any time commitment whatsoever. I think the time plus money lost when it comes to poker is really, really different than it is in sports betting. Why I think people are much easier to come back and play, and bet sports, even if they're losing bettors, because at the end of the day, it's not really that big of a strain other than the financial side of things.
And you're also talking about having to engage someone with poker to an activity they were not otherwise taking part in. When we talk about with sports betting, we're talking about people who are fans already, people who are watching the game, especially the casual bettors that the leagues are trying to bring in, the folks with the Super 6 and the other acquisition tools that are out there and the free-to-play stuff that's going to get them eventually into sports betting. They're going to see this as an ancillary activity to something they were already doing in the first place. And if they lose another 15, 20, $50 on it, they're going to look at it the same way as going to the bar and having a couple of beers and enjoying the experience.
His point about engagement was where the light bulb kind of went on for me, where I'm like, this, you know what, like, as a fan with a vested interest in how something goes and not necessarily money on it, even when I know we're losing, it's still enjoyable to watch, because it's, when you're losing at poker, it is truly the most miserable experience on the planet, because you're surrounded, like in live poker and online, you have people who are tracking you, people who are judging you. And at the end of the day, it's a sporting event, and getting to participate in a sporting event is a level of interest and engagement that doesn't go away.
I think the other thing aspect too is poker's peer-to-peer, and I'm like sitting across the table from you and you're beating me, and so you eventually realize, like, you know what, you're just better than me, or you're just better than me, or 7 of the 9 people at this table are just better than me, and I suck at this. At least with sports betting, you can blame it on the refs.
Yeah.
You can
Will Fuller
unlucky,
ruined
whatever.
everything.
You know what I'm saying? Like, unlucky, he should have made that kick, or, the quarterback played like crap. Like, there's always a way that you can justify your losing bets, as opposed to after time, you just realize, like, I might just suck at poker.
In poker, you're
I
the
might just
2-outer
suck.
happened, it's a bummer. But it's like, if every time I turn up my hand, I'm losing, you can't really write that off as just bad luck.
Yeah.
I mean, some people can. I've heard them far too much, but...
Yeah.
Ultimately, when we talk about sports betting, I think you're going to find that there is a longer experiential curve with people, right? They're willing to give it more time. I think it's a less intimidating activity. I think everybody knows about being able to talk to their friends and say, I think this team's going to win. No, I think this team's going to win. No, I think this guy is going to be the MVP. This guy is going to score that many points. Those are the things that, in the end, I think will keep people engaged with this longer, because the markets are also broader and wider as you get people into it, especially if the leagues are smart about how these free-to-play products work, because you're going to engage people in a way that at the very beginning feels like they have a chance, even if over time, as Ed was talking about, you're going to get caught up in the numbers, especially with the larger, more efficient markets. Danielle Boyd is the head of government relations for William Hill US, and she's kind enough to give us a few minutes to join here on the LSR G2E Mega Podcast. I feel like we should have some sort of.
We get Colton on
Colton's going to have to work on sort of a little bit of reverb or something like that. The MEGAPOD. So, congratulations, you made the cut for the MEGAPOD. Does that make you feel very excited today?
Oh, I couldn't be more thrilled to be joining you for the MEGAPOD of all MEGAPODs. So excited to be here today, guys.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you for inviting me to join.
Well, Danielle joins us from parts unknown, because she's always on a plane going somewhere to go to a regulatory hearing or a state legislature, and she's educating people. She's out there trying to explain to people how this whole thing works, and we've talked to a lot of folks today about what the education component of the U.S. sports betting market over the last 2 years especially has looked like. How have you seen that evolve in the work that you've done?
Well, it's been remarkable how quickly it's evolved. I think anyone that's worked in gaming for any duration of time, if you would have told us 2 years ago that any type of gaming or any form of regulation would have evolved this quickly and so pervasively in the United States, that I think we all would have been like, really? I don't know. But it's a testament to the work that's been done on the ground, I think, by GR professionals, by operators, people that are coming in and they're telling state legislatures, look, we have a black market out there that is pervasive. You need to protect consumers, and let us help you do it right. Let us help you maximize state tax revenues, and let us help you protect the public interest and make sure that the people who are sports enthusiasts and are interested in betting on sports can do it safely, securely, and under a strict and stringent regulatory model.
You deal with folks of varying education levels, to put it mildly. What are the most common questions and concerns you hear from legislators around the country?
One of the things that I think is most interesting is that, when you're talking about sports betting revenue, it doesn't scale like slots and tables do. So the mecca that has, been slots and table games revenue for state budgets, just explaining how different the margins are and how important it is to make sure that, any sort of economic burden that you're building into your legislation is going to impact the bottom line, which is already, much slimmer than what we're used to dealing with. And so, it's all about economics, making sure that you have a flexible model that can evolve with technology, but also that you're not overtaxing, charging too much for licensing fees, to the point where legal operators aren't going to be able to compete with the black market operators who don't really care about being good actors.
So Governor Christie referred to Pennsylvania as a rolling dumpster fire yesterday in terms of upfront fees and the tax rate that comes with it. How do you explain to regulators in states who see $10 million, 34%, why this isn't necessarily the ideal, at least within the industry?
It's actually been fairly easy to distinguish the difference between Pennsylvania and the other states. We have very good precedent in other states that have shown that, average tax rate somewhere between 10 and 12%, and that makes sense. We have had some states that have gone a little higher and have, charged a little bit more for licensing fees. At the end of the day, we'll see how the market regulates itself, and not regulates itself, but we'll see what happens at the end of the day and who's able to, survive.
I made the claim earlier today that it seems to me that lawmakers this year are slightly more educated about the issues than they were this time last year. Adam gave me a little side eye that made me think he didn't quite agree with that. I wonder if you've seen any change in the general conversation in state houses over the last 18 months.
A general change in conversation, to some extent. One thing I will say about state houses and sports betting legislation is there are champions in each state that are very knowledgeable and they really understand how it works. And having that type of leader is very helpful. There are legislators that really know what they're talking about, are very skilled, and may or may not have participated in some sports betting in the past. And they're kind of championing those efforts under the dome and helping their members learn more and learning enough to make educated decisions about how they're going to implement state policy.
I think, to be fair, Eric, to me, I give you side eye for all sorts of things. Like, it's not just that particular question or statement that required the side eye,
right.
But I did have to come with that for you.
Little megapod side eye.
Megapod side eye. To follow up on something you talked about in terms of how the people from the government side look at things. You have a unique skill set and set of experience where you've been on the government side before. What do you think folks on the regulatory side and the legislative side expect when you or a lobbyist from a league or someone else from from a supplier walks in the door? What are they expecting out of you?
I think they're expecting an honest conversation, and they're expecting for us in the industry, and I did come from the regulatory side, to tell them the truth. Come in and say, this is what's worked in other states, this is what may work here. But at the end of the day, it's incumbent upon the state policymakers and the regulators to decide what works best for their state. And what we're able to adapt and do business with them in whatever manner they think best protects the public policy and the interests of that individual state.
You mentioned each state having their champions. I find I have to explain to people a lot that a conservative state like Tennessee getting sports betting isn't necessarily that surprising. Do you find these champions really come from a gamut of political spectrums?
Yeah, it's been really interesting because, depending on the state makeup, whether it's predominantly conservative or whether it's, the majority caucuses are run by Democrats, I think, the conversation has been the same, and that is that everyone is well aware that this is already going on. And, whether you're a supporter of regulation, whether you're a supporter of, promoting business and free market, there is a way that this can be really just about what's good for the state. So I think that it's kind of it's kind of gone further than party lines, and that's been one of the most interesting things to see. I know when I was in West Virginia, we had the Republicans and the Democrats high-fiving each other across the aisle in a time when they weren't really agreeing on anything, but they were agreeing on sports betting. So it's interesting to see the way that it really kind of brings parties together and works on an adaptable and workable solution.
I mean, it's a shame that this is not a video podcast and people can't see that you actually just did a high five that would have been like an across the aisle high five, an air five
but
there.
She didn't clap them together
no,
she
because
didn't
that
want
would
the
have been
mic
bad
to pick
for our
it up.
audio podcasting
Right.
setup. So a very experienced high five there.
Yeah.
Well done for our situation. All right, we've given you a lot of the theoretical and experiential questions from what you've done. Now let's put some hard numbers to this. We have 13 states that have some form of legal sports betting. By the end of 2020, what is your educated guess for what we will have in the U.S. market?
I'm going to take the under on 20.
So you think we're not adding more than 7 states next year?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a flutter of activity continue. But as far as states that are, actually going to cross the finish line, I think maybe 3 or 4. I would say we'll see 3 or 4 that'll do it. But I could be wrong. We could have another year like we had this year, where it's surprise after surprise. But I would say 3 or 4 solid states will come.
What are some of you mentioned earlier, you were, for those who don't know, Danielle was the former regulator for the West Virginia Lottery, so she was around when sports betting was implemented there, and obviously have a couple champions there as well. Just wondering what I forgot the segue to my question, but wondering what you think of the state of affairs in West Virginia and how they're progressing in 2019 now that you're no longer there.
Well, I think it's terrific that they've got mobile betting up now. I think that it was really great to be on the pioneering effort there. West Virginia was one of the first states to go, and I would love to see continued success there. William Hill's in business there, and just like with all of our partners.
I remember what I was going to ask you. You obviously saw the process of the law being made. Wondering what the primary hurdles are for legislatures when they're considering sports betting bills. What are the conversations between lawmakers that make it difficult to pass sports betting in new markets?
Well, to kind of piggyback on West Virginia was unique in that we didn't have to have the conversation about which regulatory body do we put this under and really how do we do it. And I think that, there are other states that have a much more complicated conversation when they're trying to decide how do we include and incorporate lotteries? How can they participate? How can we, what do we do if we have a gaming board too? There are tribal entities in other states that, are going to be participants. And so, I don't want to say that there's impediments, but there's certainly complications in other states and deciding how to best regulate that. In West Virginia, where we had everything under one umbrella at the West Virginia Lottery, it was pretty clear that that's where it was going to go. And so, I think that as we've seen in some states, Michigan has a number of factors that they're dealing with. Those are hard conversations because you don't want to cut, one entity out, and you want to make sure everyone has the ability to thrive and succeed.
3 or 4 states was your prediction for next year. Give us your top possibilities. Who do you think has a real chance of getting it done?
I think that we'll see Ohio, Massachusetts. I think we'll see something there. Maybe not by the end of this year, but next year, I think. And, Michigan's still in the mix. We'll see what happens there.
So you don't think Utah by next year?
Yeah, Utah 2021 maybe, but not next year.
Yeah, it might take an extra year.
Anything feels possible.
Yeah, that's true. There is a little bit of that element.
I also know you have spent some time in New York over the last couple of years as they've been trying to pass mobile betting. Well, I'm going to put you on the spot here. What are the odds New York passes a mobile betting bill before the end of 2020?
I guess we can go 50-50 there. I'll split the baby.
Yeah, fair enough. That's you work in government. That's what you're supposed to do. Kind of ride both sides well enough that everybody comes out happy, even if they didn't get everything that they wanted. Danielle Boyd is the head of government relations for William Hill US, and we appreciate her time here on the G2E Megapod.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for letting me join the Megapod.
Coming to the end of the first annual, and I'm calling this annual.
Don't use first annual. That is one of the worst.
I was going to say, all the 3 editors in the room are like, Jesus, no.
Megapod.
It was that. It was Mega.
MEGAPOD,
The first
pod,
MEGAPOD
pod, pod,
that we
pod.
plan to repeat.
The inaugural.
It doesn't really flow off the tongue, but it's better than first annual.
It does not flow off the. See, listen, people are listening to this with their ears right now. We're trying to make this pleasurable to listen to, and what you said and
My
what I
voice
said,
is
mine
pleasurable to listen to, and you got carrying on about first annual is just making screeching noises in their ear.
Great list of guests we were able to pull this year. I'm very, very excited about the second annual.
Better.
And what we'll be able to get next year. Eric,
What?
of what we were able to talk to the people in here, what'd you learn?
I learned that I don't know nearly as much about sports betting as Ed Miller does. I thought I could talk to him for 3 hours about that. That was really, really interesting.
It was very interesting. I think that whenever he was talking about how he does not view his company as a competitor to what we would have assumed coming into talking to him that, are competitors to him.
I think you asked that question to the other side, to the radar side, they would definitely see this as a competitor, and probably one, frankly, considering the level of expertise that Ed and his partners are bringing to this, that they're going to need to engage at some point, whether it's dealing with them in the market or maybe potentially scooping them up at some point.
Jess, before we get out of here, you were able to ask Chris Christie about Pennsylvania. You are a Pennsylvania guru here, and he said some pretty interesting stuff. Of course, if they want to, they can head to Play Pennsylvania and read the whole story, but let's do just a quick little nugget here.
Unprompted in his keynote, which was interesting, he basically called Pennsylvania a rolling dumpster fire because of the $10 million upfront fee and the 34% tax rate. What I did in the follow-up was kind of ask, okay, but people in Pennsylvania are doing this. So is it a dumpster fire? And his point, and I think this is true, is when you have a low-margin business taxed and licensed at these kind of rates, there's going to be no money for innovation. There's going to be no money making the product better. Matt King from FanDuel, I asked him about the cross-state app, having a singular app in multiple states, and he's like, yeah, it was something we always knew we were going to do because the onus is on us to create a good product for the customer. But, that's because FanDuel's doing great everywhere.
Right.
I think other places that are coming in Pennsylvania may be struggling. They're going to bring lackluster products with them, and I think Governor Christie had a memorable point about it, and my other line that was good was the reverse. He's like, it's like an opposite field of dreams. If you do this, they won't come.
One of the things I thought was pretty interesting, Adam, is, and one of the things that we've kind of harped on this podcast here was when we were talking to IGT about the education process and what it has been like and what it continues to be for them, trying to let these legislators know what's going on, these regulators, these lawmakers, all these different people that they have to try to make. There's a whole slew of people that have to understand how all this works for things to really kind of move along.
Let me give you a little bit of insight from the political perspective, from the legislative perspective of how this gets done, because I think we all have an impression that a person like Danielle Boyd, who we spoke with, walks into an office with a politician, says, here's your 15 minutes on what sports betting is, and then that person is either educated or not educated. And the reality of the situation is sports betting is one of dozens of issues that any state legislator is looking at any particular time. They only have so much time and capacity for it, and it ranks below education and healthcare and budget and all of these other things. And so you have a staff you have to educate as well who works for that legislator, where you're really trying to get that person, you're trying to get the staff and the people around them to understand it so that they can tell the legislator, hey, thumbs up, thumbs down, or here's what you need to ask about this thing.
Probably not very high on the list of will this get me reelected either. Sports betting probably does not fall very high on the list.
I don't think the degen voting lobby is very well represented out there.
I mean, because that's one of the we know, Eric. A lot of this comes down to: is this issue, if I go out and I speak up on this, that I am for or against or whatever it might be, how is this going to help my political career? And sports betting probably pretty far down the list.
Yeah, and if anything, it's probably the folks that do not want sports betting to expand that would be voting for politicians on the issue. So yeah, not a really good platform issue.
Well, guys, this has been an amazing time here. Dustin Gouker out being Dustin Gouker.
You can't keep track of that guy.
I mean, we would have
room.
him here to help us close this thing out, but he's out. I mean, in high demand, that guy. I mean, every time I turned around, someone coming up, introducing themselves, handing business cards. I think he ran out of business cards. He gave so many out because he is so incredibly popular within this industry.
People from the pod get recognized, man.
That's the rumor. That is the rumor around here. Guys, thanks for listening to the MEGAPOD here. For Jess, for Adam, for Eric, For Dustin, for producer Colton, I'm Matt. We'll see you guys next week.